We've all heard the term low performer at work. It's used in meetings, performance reviews, and sometimes in quiet side conversations. But what does the label actually mean? And what happens when we turn a moment of struggle into a permanent identity? On this episode of the Super IO Bros, we're unpacking the myth of the low performer. We'll explore how performance is shaped not just by the individual effort, but by expectations, clarity, support, and the systems people work within. Because when we label people instead of diagnosing the problems, we don't just limit their growth, we limit the organization's ability to learn and improve. Let's get into it.
Beautiful.
So, first things first, what exactly defines a low performer in the workplace?
So I think we kind of have to be careful with that term because for me, a low performer isn't someone who's like unliked or just has a negative attitude, but is someone who's just not meeting clearly defined goals and measurable outcomes.
Mm.
And I think this could appear in a multitude of different ways and affect the team in general.
Yeah, I think it's important to add on to your definition, not meeting the clearly defined goals consistently. I think
Yes.
that's what truly like defines a low performer. I think it's a little bit difficult to like hit the nail on the head and exactly say this is what makes a low performer, but I think that's as close as you can get to it. Like saying someone who's consistently not meeting the mark for X, Y reason. But I feel like the term low performer in and of itself is an umbrella term because there's just so many different facets to it that could be leading to somebody being deemed a low performer. Like maybe they're on one week they're not meeting deadlines, on another week they're just showing up late to work, on another week they're just not communicating effectively with the teams. Like there's so many things that comprise the term low performer that it's hard to just say it's one thing, but I think that's the most important thing, that somebody is consistently not meeting the mark to be deemed a true low performer.
To piggyback off of you saying the umbrella term, which I think is a good coinage right there.
Nice.
I think it doesn't just fit in the term of an individual sense. It could be, a low performer is not it's an identity, but it's more than just an individual. It could be a team that's a low performer. It could be an organization that's performing low on its quarterly reports. But if you go into the term of, as you said, someone who does not consistently meet workplace expectations, I mean, it doesn't have to be in terms of tasks, deadlines, like you were stating. It could be they're not meeting communication requirements, they're not reaching out to the resources that they need to complete tasks. Because sometimes organizations provide the support needed for somebody to succeed. They provide the resources, but an individual just won't go after those resources. I mean, they will just not go through those communication channels. Maybe maybe they have like fear of anxiety, or I don't know. It could be anything, but it doesn't just go. Performance isn't just based on are you completing tasks or not. It's like, are you able to uh, communicate to get through the task? Are you able to go through your resources? Are you someone that's not just meeting deadlines or not? Are you working towards organizational goals, team goals, and individual goals? I feel like those are all aspects of a low performer if they're not meeting the mark. Those are all criteria. I think they all kind of cluster together and create a low performer in a sense. They make up the word.
I agree.
Wow.
I agree. I mean, like there definitely has to be some metric there that is measurable. So like, yeah, like everything you said, like it all comprises into like this one big thing.
How do you determine whether a so-called low performer is struggling due to individual factors or systemic issues within the organization? We touched briefly about the individual, and I did mention, some companies, they have resources to reach out in terms of communication, goal setting. Now, how do you determine what is the struggling low performer? Do they struggle with individual factors in themselves, or do they struggle with systemic issues within the corporation? What do you think, Yusuf?
I think one of the first questions I'd ask to figure this out is, are other people in the same role struggling?
Is it a common occurrence?
Yeah, because if the answer is yes, then that's most likely going to be a systemic issue.
Mm-hmm.
But so that could be the training is weak, or the goals or expectations aren't clearly written down or measured,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe the workload itself is unrealistic. But I think it has to do with just overall, maybe the expectations aren't really being aligned.
Okay.
So I feel like in order to find the root cause, you kind of had to approach it like a surgeon and like create a diagnostic in a sense, because I feel like this is like a gray area. It's very murky. What one person could deem is an individual factor might actually be a systemic factor. So let's say that we have a new hire who comes in and he's just consistently off the bat not meeting the mark. And we might be thinking, oh, just individually his performance is not there. Maybe we hired the wrong guy. But perhaps we didn't onboard this person properly off the bat to begin with. Maybe he doesn't even understand like what his role is. Like his role clarity just might not be there. He doesn't understand how he has to fulfill the tasks and the way to go about it. So what we might think is, an individual factor actually in turn is a systemic issue. And what might be what we might think might be like an individual factor. So let's say we have a high performer who consistently always meets the mark. We have the inverse now. And all of a sudden, his performance takes a big hit. We're going to look at it and we're going to be like, oh, this must be something's going wrong at home or something like that, because, he's always on top of the game. He's always on the ball. But maybe, we just implemented a new system into the workplace, and what used to be a high performer, we didn't train him properly on the system, or maybe he's just a little bit unfamiliar, uncomfortable. He doesn't want to stick his neck out and be like, hey, I don't know what I'm doing here. That might be causing the hit in his performance. And what we thought was an individual factor actually is once again a systemic issue. So I think it's a little bit murky. I think you have to be careful. It's kind of like a big, it depends, like it always is. And I feel like the only way that you can really go about getting to the root cause is like just having a conversation, having a one-on-one with the person to kind of just nail it down. That's the only way, because if not, it's just too vague to look from the outside in.
Yeah, I think it kind of deals with an efficiency standpoint. I feel like at the end of the day, like you said, they're meeting the mark. They take a big hit. Maybe there's a new software update. I don't know. Maybe there's a whole entire system change. And they're having a hard time adjust to it. Yeah. And whereas where I feel like individual factors, it could be like, individual factors could be coined to, in terms of efficiency, to experience. Like for example, in UPS, if you're an aircraft mechanic, and how they measure, performance, and obviously, aircraft comes in, they service it, they got long hours. Sometimes they do overnight, sometimes they do 3 a.m. to like 3 p.m. long shifts, and you're servicing planes because planes are in and out. You're at the airport, you don't really got time. It's like quick fixes. If it's a big fix, the plane never gets sent there. It probably goes to someplace up north. I don't know. But for this example, based on my experience, I'm not an aircraft mechanic, but
You're not?
I'm not.
Shock.
But I know one. So more experienced aircraft mechanics are able to service planes in like an hour, one plane per hour, which less experienced guys are able to like service a plane for like a whole work day, probably like one or two planes. So, and it's not because of it's in that sense, it's not because of an efficiency thing. They're all performers. It's more of they lack the experience that the more
to function
the
that
older
high.
guys got.
Exactly.
You know, they've been there longer. They know tricks.
Mhm.
They know how to go to it. You know, I mean, sometimes you got to turn off the planes to make sure you're not electrocuted. But if you're really in there, you got to experience. You go in there with the plane on. You know, you can just do it, and you
Don't
just
tell OSHA.
don't tell.
Don't tell OSHA.
That's a good thing. It's not going out there. But you know, it comes down to the term of like experience. You know, but now if we look at a different setting, let's go to the office setting, where experience kind of has an opposite approach nowadays. Because let's say new hires are utilizing AI to complete minuscule tasks, they're becoming a lot faster. They initially coming in, they're doing their tasks a lot faster than an experienced employee that are learning how to utilize the AI to use their task. You know, because now it's a huge AI boost implementing it. Like, oh, you got to use our in-house AI. You got to use it for these tasks. You know, so it can make your work faster. So now they got to use it, and there's some that are still doing their task manually because they reach a certain point where it's so efficient that they're going, but now with the introduction of AI, it's more their step behind, you know, in terms of like how much time it takes. Like let's say, for example, it takes somebody maybe like 15 minutes to translate a whole email document. You know, now AI can do it for you in like a minute, 2 seconds, and then you review it. It probably takes you 5 minutes after you review it.
I know what I'm reading.
But you could have it side by side, and you could like proofread it. You could check it. You know, you could maybe ask a different source. But you have the content already, and you have like 45 minutes just to verify everything's correct. Whereas you're 15 minutes manually doing it, and then after you manually do it, then you kind of have to also sometimes check yourself, you know, proofread it. So it's a lot faster. And I'm sure, you know, some emails, depending on how long it is, it could take more than 15 minutes, but AI is like, boom, you know? It's a big thing when it comes to that in terms of efficiency. You know, people struggle in terms of lack of experience, or in the terms of more experience, lack of change. So, I mean, I think it's hard to say in that situation. It depends.
It's always it depends.
It always it depends. I mean, but
shout out Rodriguez.
Yeah. So I feel in my terms, I feel like a low performer would be struggling when it comes to efficiency, most likely in terms of experience-based jobs. Whereas, you know, in an aircraft mechanic, I would say that's more individual factors. You kind of learn as you go. You learn tips and tricks. Now, in terms of in office, like the example I gave, I think that's like a more systemic issue, because maybe training should have been provided for the employees that have already been working and been doing their task already for a while without AI. And now AI comes in and it's like, okay, hey, listen, you got to use this. I mean, if you don't use it, it's fine, but you're going to be behind everybody else that's using it. You know, so it's like it's like you're Lightning McQueen. You know, you're fading fast.
Oh.
You used to be at the top, you know, 7 Piston Cups, right?
Should have been 8.
Should have been 8
if you didn't give it up.
They say the same thing about Lewis Hamilton. But guess what? All those new generations just came in, blew them out of the water. Lightning McQueen didn't adapt to the AI. That's why he gave it to
The new blood.
the new blood.
Mhm.
Someone that took it in. Now, you're working a job. You're trying to feed a family. You know, you can't just give it away to some yellow car. So what is she, a Porsche?
She is a Porsche.
You can't just give it away to a Porsche. No. You gotta keep your toes on the ground. You gotta learn what you gotta learn.
Wheels.
My bad, your wheels on the ground.
Yeah.
You gotta learn what you gotta learn. Adapt.
Mm-hmm.
But how can you adapt efficiently? Because my conversation about this question is efficiency.
Yeah.
So in this case, it would be a systemic issue.
Mm-hmm.
So I say it kind of depends. It could be an individual or a systemic issue, but it all comes down to efficiency because that's the easiest measure for companies.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would say.
Yeah, I think even like there's definitely identifiers like you just mentioned and like you mentioned, but I feel like even with the identifiers, I think we just have to be careful and we can't like be hasty and jumping to the like a conclusion because I mean we'll get into it later, but I just feel like it's such a sticky area and you don't want to like misidentify what could be the root cause. So that's why I feel like it's best to like in determining like the so-called low performer, like what it is that's causing it, like you just have to be really careful. You have to approach it like almost like trying to put yourself in their shoes kind of thing.
Like even with the efficiency thing, maybe it's just not about, you know, maybe it's just there's a handicap that they're dealing with.
I guess what I'm trying to say is back to the surgeon thing. We don't want to like misdiagnose the problem and make a bad thing even worse.
Yeah.
So it's just like a really sticky area, and like we've already mentioned 2 times now, it depends. So like we just really need to be careful when we're trying to like.
But I think it's I don't think it's uncouth to.
What's uncouth?
You don't know what the uncouth is?
No, I don't think that's common knowledge. But
all right, guys, we're back. John was being very uncouth.
Very
we had to go on figure out what uncouth was for Johnny boy over here. But we're gonna move on to question number 3. What are the unintended consequences of labeling someone a low performer? Now, I have here in my notes, in all caps,
uncouth.
a huge morale effect.
Uh-huh.
It makes it real, all right? Like it becomes a statement that makes it real for the person. Let's say you just somebody, you know, you get your bagels every day, you go to work, you're like, I love work. You know, the tasks are hard. I barely get it done, but I love it. You know? Now you go into your performance review, they look at you, they're like, hey man, notice you complete every task here, right? But you're barely making the deadlines.
Mm.
Kind of a low performer right now. We need you guys, you need to step it up.
Yeah.
You know?
Mm.
How would you feel? You know? How would you feel?
It depends on how much I care, I guess. If
Well,
I'm doing my
in
job,
this scenario, you care.
in this scenario, I care. I'm offended. I'm appalled. Uncouth. I used that wrong.
That's very wrong.
Yeah. And I mean,
Word of the day.
of course, you're offended, but yeah, definitely like what you're mentioning. Like it lets the elephant in the room, kind of thing. Like it stigmatizes this person. It gives them the label.
It makes you feel like it's almost real. Like you had a sense of positive nature. It's like, okay, you know, I know I'm struggling, but like I can turn this around.
Now other people notice that I'm struggling. It's not just like me. It's noticeable.
Yeah, and it's not, you know, he knew he was struggling.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure his boss knew he was struggling, you know, but the conversation was not meant.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was just kind of like, okay, I'm struggling, but I feel like I'm getting better. You know, but then you go ahead, you have this conversation with your employee, and you're just like, I'm here with your performance review, and you're performing low. You're a low performer right now. You're barely struggling to meet deadlines. We need you kind of to step it up. We can't give you a raise. Things like that. Already incentives out the window and motivation out the window too. If you think about it, you kind of it's a demotivator. You were motivated to be able to catch up and jump where you're lacking. Now, with that sort of negative connotation, it makes the negative connotation into a negative reality. It's like, oh, I'm a low performer.
Yeah.
Instead of like, these are certain things that I have to work through that I already know, but it's like now he's just saying, overall, dunzo, buddy. You're a low performer. So even in aspects that you are performing good in your daily tasks, now you're already thinking to yourself, damn, I'm performing low on this too. And then you might start, as a morale effect, you might start performing low on those tasks that you're performing great in. Just because maybe there's certain tasks that you're not that good at, like you were mentioning earlier. They could be very good at certain tasks and very bad at others. That's my take on it.
Yeah, I definitely feel like it could have like a inverse effect. It can definitely backfire once you label somebody as a low performer. You might think going into it like this might light a fire under them. It might, cause them to want to,
improve.
achieve, to a higher level or like to a higher clip or whatever you want to call it. But like you said, it might just become a demotivator. It might be the complete opposite. It might make this person who maybe wasn't a low performer to begin with, maybe there was systemic factors that were affecting the performance or individual factors that were hindering them. It wasn't actually their ability or inability to do the work. And just jumping to this conclusion of deeming them the low performer just kind of like negates all of it. Like we can't fix it at this point because now this person has given up. This person is feeling this way about themselves now. They are like stigmatized amongst their team as maybe somebody who's holding them back from reaching, greater team success or something like that. They're the factor that's bringing them down. So like this might cause conflict amongst group members. Now team members might actually not want to even communicate with this person or might hold them back even more because they're, feeling this type of way.
Or they might not want to collaborate on tasks.
Yeah, exactly. Like withdraw information from this person, which might actually cause them to be an even worse performer. So rather than labeling them that low performer, you definitely need to like reframe it. It shouldn't just be so cookie cutter. It shouldn't be so black and white. But yeah, that's the negative.
I think it can also kind of create like quiet fear in teams kind of spread in the team. So people can view like, oh, this person's a low performer because of these undermeasured goals. And so they start to focus on avoiding mistakes instead of focusing on just doing better work or improving. And in essence, they would not be high performers or try to seek that. They would just be, like you said, one-time employees.
I feel like you see that a lot in like athletes. Once they start to hear like the noise kind of creep in, that fear kind of start to set in, and then they start being like hypercritical on, oh, like I can't make the long pass or something like that, or like, oh, the haters out there are saying like I can't run or whatever, like I'm a running back, but like Lamar Jackson and stuff. Obviously he proved them wrong, but like you said, it might be inverse. Like they might start overthinking what it is that they're doing and just ruin their performance even more.
Now, you brought up the athlete perspective.
I did.
In sports, performance is everything. If you're not performing where you need to be, rarely are you going to stay on a team for long. I mean, you have some average 3 points per game their whole career, and they stay on the team.
Udonis has.
That guy's a legend. That guy's a legend.
Hey, talk about it.
Yeah, don't talk about him. But I've been watching recently the Formula One series on Netflix.
Shout out.
Shout out. Formula One coming out. McLaren, champions. But Red Bull has a very performance heavy team. They have their main team, Red Bull Racing, then they have their V car, which is their Red Bull secondary team. I would say their junior team, their B team, but it's also in Formula One. So they're still one of the
like the premier teams.
Yeah, now I believe it is 10 teams, 10 or 11 teams. So they're top 11 teams in the world because there's only a certain amount of teams in Formula One. So if you're one of those drivers, you're top 22 because there's 22 drivers on the grid now. So you're top 22 drivers on the grid if you're on those seats. But here's the thing. You have Red Bull, since you have an A team and a B team. Your B team, if you're on the A team, you know if you're not performing, B team can replace you whenever.
Mm-hmm.
Since they're in tandem, they can just jump, they can cut you off in the middle of the season. And they already know a guy's been driving, they're looking at his stats, they're looking at his performance, and they can just replace you no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
Because in Formula One, you have maybe like 2 or 3 backup drivers as well on like a regular F1 team. Not Red Bull, you have the drivers racing with you,
mm-hmm.
your possible replacements,
mm-hmm.
you know. And even if you're on the B team, you're not safe either because you have people in F2, you have the backup racers. Everybody wants your spot.
Cutthroat.
Yeah, it's very cutthroat. Red Bull is seen for being very cutthroat, very pressured because if you don't perform in Red Bull, you're out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whereas other teams like McLaren, they trust the drivers that they choose and they kind of try to build a nice environment for them to grow. You know, whereas now if we look at the numbers for McLaren in the last 5 years, 2021 4th place in the Constructors Championship, which means overall their team got fourth fastest car on the grid. 2022 5th, 2023 4th, and that's like pretty like down there, right? And they've had the same drivers for about 3 to 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Now the last 2 years, first. They built up their drivers, and when their drivers got a good sense of like experience and ready to drive in terms of performance, without that pressure,
mm-hmm.
they're like, we're banking on you. We'll build you up, give you that experience. We'll make you into champions. Now we'll provide you a car.
Mm-hmm.
You know, main focus was the drivers first. Now they built a car around the drivers after they've already identified drivers' strong points, their weaknesses, and everything because it was a driver focused. Whereas Red Bull is, we have the car, you got to perform. If you don't perform,
we'll find your replacement.
Yeah. Whereas there was this guy that he came, I believe his name is Van der Vries, and great resume, Formula 2 champion, Formula champion, which means like the electric car Formula champion. And he went in there at the B team. He was predicted to be like the guy. He didn't score a single point the whole season, but you don't score a point in Formula One until you're like top 10. You get like 1 point. Then if you're 9, you get 2, and it goes from there. So he was finishing 11th, 12th. That's not bad because there's 20 positions that you could be in, but like he's almost to the points. But because he didn't reach that, in half the year he got replaced,
mm-hmm.
and his teammate, he got moved up to the 18, and then the other guy wasn't performing. He wasn't getting second place with Max Verstappen, or he wasn't even top 5. Moved him down. So it's like in those cutthroat environments, it really makes you second guess yourself. You know, in the beginning, he had the pressure, can I make it in Formula One? But then as he went through it and he still wasn't able to make points, he saw the team around him was doubting him. he saw like, okay, they need me to perform, but I don't feel like I'm getting, the support needed for me to grow. I'm coming off electric cars, so now I have to learn how to really function in a full, highly powered engine.
Yeah, so it just goes back to, is it the individual or is it
systemic?
Yeah.
Now, when you said it though, when you say you're a low performer, because he was told, it makes it real. It adds pressure. It allows for mistakes to happen. As you were saying, Yusuf, it allows for mistakes to happen because it becomes the person's identity in many cases in a high pressure situation. Because nowadays jobs depend, but a lot of mistakes you do can be a costly mistake in the future. One comma missed can be $1 billion error in the future. In DHL, if you miss one sort of shipment, like one sort of item in the shipment, it could ruin the whole entire shipment. The accountability for it, the cost deduction, the tax purposes, everything. So it could be even stolen. like it could be, somebody's like, oh, it's not here, extra, we'll keep it. So it does. High pressure situations are everywhere, but when you make it a reality by calling somebody a low performer, that's when the pressure really starts to sink in and mistakes happen. And that's when the person starts to identify more with themselves, because you could have mistakes back to back. Everybody's human, right? Sometimes you're just in a funk, but you got to get out of it. Now, if you constantly have this pressure of this title on your name, it's like, I might be in the ringer, or like you think of something that you wanted to obtain, but you might not obtain. It's like, I really wanted like a raise, but I might not get one if I'm not performing. They said I'm a low performer. So just thinking about what you don't have or what you might not get as a result of the conversation is already a negative. And calling somebody a low performer creates that negative.
I agree. I really like the McLaren shout, because it just goes to show exactly like we were saying, how they were technically low performers for 4 or 5 years. I don't know, whatever you said, like back to back to back. They weren't meeting the expectation, but rather than just dumping them out, they probably looked at individual factors, if something's going on with the drivers themselves, and probably more so systemic factors, such as what's going on with the car, the tires, any of the multiple factors that we already addressed, like, could be hindering someone's performance. And they created that continuity with the drivers and the cars, and then through working together, they turned this quote unquote low performing team into a high performing team that just won. No?
They won the construction championship 2 years in a row, and they just won. Their driver, Lando Norris, just won the championship. Yeah.
So low performers
starting soon. New episode comes out this Friday.
So low performers. Was he really even a low performer to begin with, or was it the system that was failing him, or multitude of factors?
It's the experience thing. I mean, it just wasn't their time. They didn't have experience. They didn't have the car.
Yeah, but I just think to like, that's the thing. Like, we can't jump to it. We can't jump to the conclusion of like deeming them a low performer.
Yeah, it depends as well. Like, in certain situations, are they a low performer because somebody else is such a high performer? Like in 2023 Red Bull, they lost. They only didn't get first in one race. They won every other race in that year. They were by far the fastest car, and they had the best drivers that year. So would you say you're a low performer if you were placed second or third? Because you're looking at Max Verstappen in points. He scored over 500 points in the leaderboard. The closest guy, you're saying the closest guy was his own teammate at 300 something, and below that, we're talking 200. Are you saying you're a low performer? That back in the day, 200 wins you points, wins you a championship. but they were so dominant, and it made everybody else seem like such a low performer. So outliers are also important to take in.
Yeah, that's why it goes back to like what we said. It depends.
It depends.
It always depends. When in doubt, it depends.
It does. You shake it out. All right, now that kind of really jumps into the next question, which is how do we address performance challenges without turning them into identities? We've already talked about the struggle about saying somebody's a low performer. Now, how do we go about it?
So I think the key is keeping the focus on their behaviors and their outcomes, not their personal traits. So instead of saying something like just you're not performing, instead of just say like, oh, these what's called these deliverables didn't meet the standard that we agreed on. So you should make it specific, make it more time specific, and make it more about the outcome or what happened, not who that person is.
I like it. Trying to keep it objective as possible. I also think, on top of trying to keep it as objective as possible, with consequences part that we just covered, we see how like sticky it can be and how slippery of a slope it can be. So I feel like without turning them into identities, like the most important way that we should address these performance challenges is like trying to keep it human. And like how I mentioned earlier, trying to put yourself in their shoes, trying to get to the problem as objectively and just, we don't want to hurt anybody's ego to make it real, like you mentioned. So you kind of have to tiptoe across the problem because we don't want to scorn anybody. We don't want to, point fingers and be like, this is your fault, because it very well could be our fault. So it's difficult to like address it, but I guess just trying to keep it as human and as objective as possible, because like I said, it's a slippery slope.
Yeah, like talk through it, make it into like a conversation. Like
like an intervention sort of thing, like trying to, rather than just saying, highlighting your negatives, try to be like,
Let's just focus on behaviors, the context, and support rather than labeling just the person.
Yeah,
exactly.
Talking about framing it a different way instead of saying they are a low performer, more like they are struggling with the task in this context. Just breaking it down with them. It kind of shows support in a certain way. It shows willingness to help you improve, and I think that's important in terms of, learning and growing. It's important to know it's like, okay, they're my boss, but they could also coach me towards success. They're like, oh, I notice you're struggling with this. Let's frame this. Let's try to figure out how we can turn this around. What are certain things you're struggling with, and what are some programs that we can offer, or like not even that. It's like maybe they're like there's resources and they don't even know what's out there. And the leader, the manager, the boss, or supervisor can pinpoint them. It's like, hey, how about you check these resources, or let's look over this together and see where you're struggling. You don't want to go have the same problem, because having the problem is one thing. Having a recurrent problem is another. You don't want a recurrent problem. You don't want them to be recurrently a low performer in a certain situation of their job, in a certain task. You want to see improvement on all.
You mean before addressing it or after?
After addressing it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because then it is.
Then it becomes a problem. Yes. Because first thing is identifying a problem. And it's like, I notice you've been struggling, whatever. And, instead of saying a low performer, kind of pick out like which one. And it's like, is there, what are you struggling with in that? Like, let's talk about it, or if you're someone that wasn't like a supervisor that was previously in the position of the employee, maybe they have some experience with what they struggled in the task. It's like, oh, when I had when I was doing this task, I struggled with this aspect. Is this what you're struggling with in the task? Or like, is it a time issue? Like, what's going on? Like, is it too much workload? So having that conversation in the term of like, I've had the experience, I've been where you've been, or just trying to understand where they are at. Those are like two key points in terms of understanding the context and behaviors that go into the task.
Yeah, we just have to like. I think we all agree. It just has to be like the process has to be more humanized than just black and white.
Yeah,
The perfect
low
example
performer.
is
You're not
the
doing right.
McLaren versus Red Bull. It can't be as cutthroat as some organizations might want it to be.
Yeah.
But if it is a reoccurring problem, then that is one the more cutthroat-ish mentality might be coming in, because obviously at this point, if we've addressed it, we've put in the work into trying to fix things. The low performing myth isn't always a myth. There are just low performers in the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, where you said some people do succeed in those cutthroat environments. If you look at Max Verstappen, he's still going crazy. He's still going really good, especially with his car. He got second place, and his teammate last year, I think, got like 10th. So it's like the car is definitely not the same level as McLaren's, but he's just a really good driver. So, but it's like it's more. It's not an individual sport at the end of the day. It's a team sport. So you can see where McLaren's togetherness and their will to bring up both drivers, not in a cutthroat competitive environment. Competitive with themselves, yes, because you want improvement. That's how you grow with each other. Rocky Balboa and Creed. Apollo Creed.
Oh.
Apollo Creed.
Sorry, the son.
Yes. the father.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mentioned the son.
Yes. They're running on the beach, training together, getting better, 6'7". So I think in certain situations, cutthroat, some people do excel. It's not like everybody doesn't.
Yeah.
Some people love the pressure. They deal great with it. Like you said, it has the opposite effects for some people. When they're called a low performer, like, I'm never going to be called a low performer again. The Kobe Bryant mentality, I'll never lose again. Like Michael Jordan, tapped him in the butt. It's like, it's not your time, son. After that, he took that personal. Next game he saw him, he scored 50 on him. So, I mean, what can you say? Some people take things personal. They really get into it, and they're able to succeed, but others are not like that. And it's good to come into the mentality of, let's framework the problem. Let's figure out what the situation is, whether you are someone that excels in high critical situations or not. We want to excel everybody, because you can't just you can treat people differently in the workplace without showing favoritism. You want to show favoritism now, because some people have different work styles, and as a leader, it's important to realize this. But it's also good to have a certain guideline how to go about situations. Then you kind of tweak it for each person. That's how I think about it.
Nice. I love the way you think, G.
Yeah.
But
Yusuf, you got anything to add to that?
I was gonna say that I don't think kind of disagree with John's take that what's it called? There are low performers. I'm not kicking you, bro. But that there are low performers. I think it's just that there's a skill mismatch. So
Skill mismatch.
or skill gap with where they're.
Let's talk about it. What do you mean by skill gap? And what aspects?
Like, maybe during the hiring process, this person was never meant for that role, and they were brought in, and then they're deemed a low performer, but really they just don't have the necessary experience or knowledge for it.
So what you just said to me sounds like
a systemic issue of
Yeah,
a bad hiring process.
In the end, a low performer was hired. Like, that's not sure. It's not their fault that they're a low performer.
But are they a low performer or are they an unqualified
I think
performer?
I think the person who hired them was a low performer. They're a low performer. So
you get a low performance, you get a low performance,
yeah.
and you get a low performance.
I get what you're trying to say. I love being nice and everything, but unfortunately, sometimes some people just aren't cut out for certain positions.
Yeah.
So
like that guy was not cut out for Formula One, clearly.
Exactly, and I don't think you can necessarily just only blame the hiring process, but also the fact that there are just low performers, and some people are okay with that being a low performer.
It doesn't mean they're a low performer in general. Maybe they thrive in different positions, maybe they're in different organizations, but just not for that job.
Yeah.
And I think that's okay to realize. Yeah.
But they're still deemed a low performer. They're still a low performer.
Yeah, for that specific position or role.
But I can't talk about oppositions. So I get what you're trying to say, but I just think it reaches a point like Carlos was mentioning, after we've already had the intervention, after we've already addressed the elephant in the room, after we've already exhausted all the resources that we can into this employee, what else can we do? It's just the sad reality. Demote. I mean, not everybody's got a B team. You're sorry, buddy. You're fired.
Yeah.
You're out. You can't. But
fired.
Hey, what the? But yeah, I mean, it's the truth. But I would say there's a lot of situations that you definitely can salvage. That's why I've consistently reiterated we can't be hasty and just jump to conclusions. You really need to, like I said, you need to exhaust all the resources, because we know the most expensive part of an organization is the hiring process. So you don't want to just jump to firing somebody.
Then the firing process too.
Yeah, and going through all that, you need to try.
Shouldn't label someone a low performer too early.
Yeah,
well, I think there's that's why it's every 6 months normally a performance review, or unless that person is really bad, hey, come to my office, what's going on?
Yeah.
But I think that's a different problem.
Yeah.
But if there's one thing to take away from this conversation, it's this: performance is a snapshot, not a personality trait. When we turn challenges into labels, we close the door on growth. But when we treat them as signals, we open the door to learning, clarity, and better systems. The goal isn't to ignore underperformance, it's to understand it, to ask better questions, to look at expectations, support, and context before we decide what's wrong. Because when people feel seen as capable rather than categorized, they're far more likely to improve, engage, and contribute in meaningful ways. Thanks for listening to the Super IO Bros podcast. If this episode made you rethink how performance is defined, where you work, share it with someone who's building teams, leading others, and navigating their own growth. We'll catch you in the next time.